You can feel it, like the hum behind a wall, like a pressure in the air before a storm. Something about this world feels off. It's not always loud. In fact, it's quiet, eerily quiet. A silence that doesn't soothe, but watches. You walk down the street, past dozens of people. They laugh, they talk, they gesture like people do. But sometimes, in the middle of that noise, a thought creeps in, uninvited. Are they really all here? You don't say it aloud. You don't even finish the sentence in your own mind. But the suspicion has already taken root, that some of them, maybe many of them, are just acting, mimicking, echoing life without ever really living. And the more you feel it, the less you can unfeel it. Because once the veil begins to lift, it doesn't go back down. And the veil? It's thinner than anyone wants to admit. There's a theory. No, not a theory, a knowing, that not every person walking this earth is fully conscious, not broken, not evil, not possessed, just empty, like a shell with the lights on, but no one home. It's not about malice or malevolence. It's about function. They serve a purpose. They're part of the system, designed, whether biologically, spiritually, or synthetically, to fill the space, to move the pieces, to reinforce the code. These aren't your friends. They aren't your enemies. They're something else, something in between. Organic portals. You've seen the term, maybe in a meme, maybe in a thread too weird to share, maybe whispered in some forgotten corner of the internet where the rules of polite conversation don't apply. But once you hear it, it echoes, like something you already knew but hadn't yet remembered. The idea that not all people are people, that some are more like background noise, playing roles, repeating scripts, kept here not by choice, but by programming. And if that's true, if even a fraction of it is true, then everything changes. This isn't conspiracy. It's not fear. It's recognition. A deep ancestral instinct that something is wrong with the pattern, that the simulation, if it is a simulation, has bugs. And maybe those bugs are people, or at least what looks like people. Because somewhere between digital code and ancient mythology, this idea has lived, quietly, persistently, waiting for the right moment to surface. And that moment is now. In the chapters that follow, we'll take this theory to places you've never gone before. We'll trace its roots from ancient mysticism to cutting-edge philosophy, from channeled transmissions to scientific whispers. We'll explore how the idea of soulless vessels has evolved, or perhaps devolved, into memes, into movement, into something dangerously close to belief. We'll look not just at them, but at you, the one asking the question, the one seeing through the cracks, the one who can't quite go back to sleep, because that's what this really is, isn't it? A choice between pretending the world is what you were told it is, or admitting that sometimes, when you look someone in the eyes, there's nothing looking back. And so, before we go any further, let me ask you something. When was the last time you truly felt another soul? There's something deeply unsettling about the idea that not every person you meet is fully real. Not in the sense of flesh and blood. They bleed, they breathe, they blink. But in something subtler, deeper. Real in the sense of presence, of essence, of soul. You start to feel it, not in facts, but in frequencies. In the way certain people respond just a beat too late. In the way their eyes glaze when you try to speak about anything that breaks the script. They blink, they smile, they nod. All the signals of a response are there. But underneath, nothing. Just a placeholder, a proxy, an echo of a real conversation that never arrives. You tell yourself it's just you, that maybe you're imagining it, that maybe they're tired, distracted, shy. But the pattern repeats. Different faces, same absence. Like someone built a very good replica of a human and sent it out into the world without telling anyone. And the strange part is, nobody else seems to notice. The hollowness, the artificiality, the way everything they say seems sourced from somewhere else. A news feed, a slogan, a sitcom. You keep waiting for the real them to show up. But what if this is all there is? The term organic portal didn't come from a think tank or a university. It didn't appear in peer-reviewed journals or TED Talks. It arrived, as the most dangerous truths often do, from the edge. From a woman named Laura Knight Jadczyk, who claimed to be receiving transmissions from higher intelligences, beings who call themselves the Cassiopeans. In their hypnotic Q&A sessions, one line stood out and refused to go away. 1 out of every 2 humans is an organic portal, effectively soulless. It wasn't said with fear. It was said with finality. The idea landed like a spark in dry brush. At first, it was ignored, dismissed, mocked. Then it started spreading, quietly, through fringe forums, occult message boards, and PDF files too obscure for Google to care about. But the people reading it weren't average readers. They were the ones who already felt something wrong with the world. The ones who could feel the difference between a being with presence and one just going through motions. And when they read that line, something in them whispered, "You already knew." The portal isn't a machine. That would be too easy. It's not a Terminator or a robot army. It's worse. It's subtle. It's organic. It passes as human, is human in every biological sense, but lacks something essential. Call it soul. Call it spark. Call it the animating mystery. The thing that makes your breath mean something. And once you start seeing it, you realize how pervasive it is. You see them at work, at family dinners, at weddings, at funerals, and always the same pattern. They play the role, but they never deviate, never question, never wonder, never wake, and the idea begins to haunt you. Because if the world is filled with placeholders, with soulless actors playing parts in a grand illusion, then what does that say about the illusion itself? Who wrote the script? Who cast the actors? Who decided that the real ones, the ones who can see, should be surrounded by those who can't? But maybe that's the point. Maybe the game isn't just to wake up, but to stay awake in a world that constantly begs you to forget. A world designed not to challenge you openly, but to lull you silently. And the portals? They're not here to harm you. They're here to anchor the simulation. They're here to keep the dream from cracking. And you? You're here to remember. Not because you're better, but because you're built different. And if that makes you dangerous, good. Let it. As this idea takes root, it doesn't just change how you see others. It begins to change how you see yourself. Because if some people are simply running code, then the question naturally turns inward. Am I? At what point does routine become programming? How many times have you laughed on cue, said the right thing at the right time, nodded when you didn't agree, smiled without joy? These moments begin to stack, and suddenly, the boundary between real and automated blurs, not just in others, but within your own being. And that's the true danger of the organic portal theory. Not that it creates paranoia, but that it holds up a mirror, a brutal one that doesn't flatter or comfort. Because in this mirror, you see the masks you've worn, the compromises you've made, the scripts you've recited, the times you acted not from soul, but from programming, fear, habit, trauma. The matrix isn't just around you, it's in you. And recognizing that is not an act of despair. It's the beginning of awakening. But make no mistake, the system prefers you asleep. It prefers your mind filled with content, your time sliced into notifications, your emotions regulated by feedback loops. And it rewards those who play the part, the ones who don't question, the ones who recite instead of reflect, the ones who keep the current flowing in the river of sameness. These are not villains. They're not evil. They're functions, perfect agents of continuity. And whether they're born that way or built that way, the result is the same: inertia. You start to see it in social dynamics, how certain people seem allergic to silence, how discomfort erupts the moment you steer conversation into existential territory, how jokes are used as deflection, how performance replaces presence. It's as though there's an invisible firewall between you and them, not a wall of language or intellect, but of depth, of being. You dig and hit bedrock, fast, every time, and it leaves you aching, so you begin to pull back. Not because you're arrogant, but because something inside you can't help it. The loneliness that follows isn't the kind that comes from lack of company. It's the kind that comes from being surrounded by noise and never hearing music, being among people and never feeling met. You start to crave less, fewer conversations, fewer explanations, fewer illusions, and more silence, more truth, more soul. But you also begin to wonder, what if they were never meant to wake up? What if their role isn't to question, but to anchor? Not to fly, but to stabilize the gravity of this world. That's the dark beauty of the theory. It doesn't require everyone to ascend. It doesn't even assume that's possible. It only asks one thing: that you recognize the difference. And that recognition, it's not elitism, it's survival. Because once you see the mask and realize it's not a mask but the whole face, you stop waiting for the person behind it to speak. You stop bleeding energy into conversations that don't nourish. You stop offering soul where soul is not mirrored. And in that space, something rare is born: discernment. The most endangered resource in the modern world. But discernment alone isn't enough. If you want to navigate a world filled with mimicry, you need something more. You need stillness. You need grounding. You need the kind of inner clarity that doesn't flinch when faced with emptiness. Because the moment you fear the emptiness, it consumes you. It pulls you into projection, judgment, and worst of all, superiority. And once you believe you're above, you've already descended. This is the paradox. To see the difference without separating, to guard your energy without closing your heart, to walk among echo chambers without becoming one. It is not a philosophy. It is a practice. And it begins every time you ask, is this real? Or is this a loop? You begin to notice it everywhere. In the way people talk without ever saying anything, in the way their eyes glaze over the moment a conversation veers outside socially approved scripts. They laugh at the right moments. They use the right slang. Their posts mirror the trending language. Their reactions are always exactly what you'd expect, but nothing surprises, nothing cuts through. It's as though you're engaging not with a person, but with a well-trained algorithm. A script that knows what to say, but has never asked itself why it says it. And the more you see it, the more exhausting it becomes. Because now you can't turn it off. Every small talk interaction becomes a litmus test. Every, "How are you?" feels preloaded. Every compliment sounds like it's been pasted from a template. You're not judging, you're observing. Watching how the world runs on predictable loops. Behavioral patterns masquerading as personality, social rituals performed like theater, emotion mimicked like choreography, and slowly, a terrifying realization begins to form. The system doesn't need you to believe in anything. It just needs you to keep repeating. It doesn't matter what you say, as long as it's familiar. Doesn't matter what you feel, as long as you don't question the source of that feeling. And those who comply, not maliciously, not even knowingly, they become amplifiers of the code. Organic nodes in a spiritual neural network. Their presence ensures stability, not truth, not life. Stability. You begin to understand why these people feel hollow. Not because they lack emotion, but because their emotion has been outsourced, scripted. Their outrage follows the news cycle. Their joy follows the trend. Their sorrow follows the loss of an image, not the loss of meaning. It's not that they're empty, it's that they've been emptied, hollowed out over time by repetition, consumption, distraction. And what remains is a shell, expressive, articulate, socially competent, but fundamentally reactive. This is what the ancient mystics warned us about, not in modern language, but in metaphor. The Gnostics called them Archons, beings who exist to keep the soul tethered to illusion, not evil, but inert, not conscious, but effective. In Kabbalistic tradition, there are shells, kelipot, which hide the light. In Sufi texts, they are called the veiled ones, not lacking in soul, but covered in layers of forgetfulness so thick the original flame can no longer be seen. Different words, same warning. And the portals? They're not in some distant world. They're in your office, your family, your mirror. Because what this theory demands is not just belief, it demands vigilance, brutal self-awareness, a willingness to ask not only, are they real? But am I real right now? Am I present? Am I acting from essence or expectation? Am I responding or am I performing? That's the fractal nature of this system. The moment you think you've found them, you've lost the plot. Because the true portal isn't always someone else. Sometimes it's you. When you numb yourself, when you recite someone else's truth, when you move through the day as an actor without a director, the matrix doesn't need to attack you. It just needs you to forget you're awake. And this is why the idea of organic portals is so dangerous, because it's not a story about them. It's a mirror for us, not a weapon to divide, but a lens to see. The soulless are not enemies. They're reminders. That soul must be chosen again and again. That presence is not a default. It is a discipline. And in a world designed to suppress that discipline, remembering becomes the highest rebellion. Once the lens is in place, it becomes nearly impossible to see the world the same way. Not because the theory gives you answers, but because it forces you to ask better questions. Why do some people never break routine? Why do entire groups respond with identical outrage to things they haven't investigated? Why do conversations so often hit a wall of cliché the moment they begin to deepen? It's tempting to retreat, to write it all off. They're just portals. They're not real. But that's not discernment. That's spiritual arrogance dressed up as clarity. And it leads to the very sleep this path is meant to awaken you from. The real question is not whether someone is a portal. The question is whether they've forgotten who they are, or if they never had the capacity to remember at all. Here is where it becomes dangerous, beautiful, and necessary to tread carefully. The Cassiopean material spoke of organic portals as structurally different, biologically similar, but metaphysically empty, created as a support structure for the matrix. Actors in the play, not writers of their own script. And maybe that's true. But maybe the line isn't fixed. Maybe it's a spectrum. Maybe there are those who begin dormant, shallow, reactive, unconscious. And then something cracks. Something burns. And they remember. Maybe what we call a portal is just someone still sleeping. And maybe the fire in you is what helps them wake. But to be that fire, you must first protect your own. Because the system feeds on unguarded energy, It harvests your attention through conflict. It steals your awareness through repetition. And the more you try to wake up others who aren't ready, the more likely you are to burn out in the process. That's not compassion. That's codependence with the matrix. So you begin to move differently. You speak less. You watch more. You learn the difference between presence and performance, not just in others, but in yourself. You stop trying to save people who haven't asked to be saved. You stop chasing resonance in places where silence screams louder than words, not out of bitterness, but because you've learned not all signals deserve a response. Some are just echoes. Some are just background noise. And yet, despite everything, despite the frustration, the alienation, the sense that you're walking through a world of beautiful, hollow vessels, something in you refuses to fully shut down. You still hope, not naively, not with wide-eyed delusion, but with a quiet, burning refusal to give up on the possibility that the soul, even buried, can still stir because you've seen it, maybe once, maybe twice. In a stranger's eyes that suddenly lit up with something ancient, in a child's laughter that pierced the simulation, in your own darkest hour when you expected emptiness and instead found presence waiting for you like a secret never lost. You've seen it, and that's why you keep going. You are not here to prove the theory. You are here to live in such a way that your very presence disorients the code. You are here to walk with such integrity that even the programmed begin to glitch in your reflection. You are not here to judge. You are here to remind. And sometimes, the greatest reminder is not a word. It is silence. Not a call-out, but a stare that doesn't flinch. Not an argument, but a presence that refuses to mirror the emptiness. This is the burden and the blessing. To see the hollowness and still bring fullness. To recognize the imitation and still speak from originality. To be the one who knows and still chooses love over distance. Not to rescue, but to be uncorrupted. One of the most unnerving realizations that follows awakening to this idea isn't the existence of hollow people. It's the realization that the system has a language, not a spoken one, not even written, but a rhythm, a pulse, a series of codes embedded into everyday life, subtle enough to seem normal, but insistent enough to keep the structure intact. And those who serve it, consciously or not, speak this language fluently. You've heard it in corporate meetings that sound like parodies of sincerity, in empty affirmations passed around social media like digital incense, in political slogans repeated with the same cadence, regardless of who's in power, words that simulate depth, phrases that carry no weight, emotional gestures that go nowhere. It's the system speaking through flesh, a syntax of soul suppression. But the most chilling part isn't that these phrases are empty, it's that they're efficient. They neutralize discomfort. They bypass inquiry. They simulate resolution. When someone says, "It is what it is," the system exhales. When they say, "Trust the process," without ever naming the process, the matrix smiles. And when they look into your eyes, see the flicker of something that can't be controlled, and quickly change the subject, the firewall activates. This isn't personal, it's structural. The system has designed itself to reward mimicry. Mimicry keeps the grid stable. True originality, that's a threat. Depth disrupts the loop. Real emotion short-circuits the code. And that's why so many interactions feel like sandpaper to the soul. Not because people are cruel, but because they're tuned to a frequency that cancels your own. So you begin to feel like a signal dropped into the wrong broadcast, like you're speaking a forgotten language in a world obsessed with fluency in illusion. And yet, you keep speaking. Because even if most don't understand it, even if they recoil or dismiss or mock, one might hear, and one is enough. But this is also when the real test begins, because the temptation to adapt grows, to soften your tone, to dilute your truth, to speak in the programmed language so they won't reject you, so you won't feel so alone. And it's seductive. This idea that maybe you should compromise a little just to stay connected, just to be understood. Don't, because every time you do, a piece of your signal fades. Every time you translate your truth into the language of comfort, you shrink the very light that brought you here. You were not meant to fit in. You were not meant to echo. You were not meant to be relatable. You were meant to interfere, to disrupt, to signal so clearly that even one soul buried under layers of simulation might pause, might remember. You are not here to be fluent in the system's language. You are here to speak soul, even if it sounds like static to everyone else. There comes a moment in this process, after the realization, after the suspicion, after the isolation, where something deeper begins to stir. Not in the world, in you. A question, not shouted, but whispered. Not intellectual, but ancestral. And it asks, how much of what you see outside is simply a reflection of what's unhealed within? Because the theory is seductive. It gives you a lens to explain the world's madness, a way to classify the blank stares, the shallow conversations, the dead eyes behind polished smiles. But if you're not careful, if you don't bring it back to the soul's mirror, it becomes another script, another layer of code, another way the system fools you into believing you're separate, special, above. And that's when it wins. The concept of organic portals is not just a description of others. It's a test of your discernment, your humility, your ability to hold paradox without turning it into dogma. Because yes, some people seem to lack a center. But have you never drifted through days without presence? Yes, some mimic love without depth. But have you never said, "I'm fine," while hiding a storm? The line between souled and soulless does not run between you and them. It runs through every moment, every breath, every choice. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of projection. The darkness we cannot face in ourselves, we cast onto others. It's easier to label them hollow than admit that you too have gone numb, that you too have performed when you didn't feel, that you too have collapsed into convenience over truth. And so the moment you declare, "They're all portals," the mirror turns. And you must ask, who am I becoming when I believe this? Because even a true idea can corrupt if wielded without grace. Even a sacred insight becomes poison if used to divide instead of discern. And this is why the mystics always returned the path to the self. Not because the world isn't real, but because you are the only part of the world you can truly wake up. So now, the theory evolves. It becomes less about sorting people into categories and more about watching states. In them, yes, but also in yourself. You begin to see that consciousness flickers, that awareness isn't a permanent identity, but a dynamic current. And this is when real responsibility begins. Because now, when you see someone looping, you no longer rush to judge. You feel it. But you also listen. You watch for the moment their script falters. And then, you speak. Gently. With precision. Like striking a match in a dark room. And sometimes, only sometimes, you'll see it. That flicker. That pause. That split-second disruption in their code. And in that space, however brief, you remember why you stayed awake in the first place. It wasn't to escape them. It was to reach them, but only when they're ready. Until then, you walk silently, not superior, but sovereign, not arrogant, but anchored, not above, but within, awake, aware, and unshakably real in a world built to reward performance over presence. And that in itself is the rebellion. There's something unsettling that begins to happen once this theory takes root in your perception. You stop being surprised. The odd behaviors, the vacant expressions, the robotic replies, they no longer confuse you. Instead, they become expected. A kind of background static in human form. You walk through the grocery store, through airports, through small talk and scripted conversations, and a quiet observation follows you everywhere. This isn't what it looks like. At first, it feels like paranoia, but it's not. It's recognition, not all at once, but over time, in layers. Someone says something, and the timing is just slightly off. You offer an original idea, and they blink, smile politely, and pivot to a meme they saw. You ask a question, not a rhetorical one, a real one. And what comes back isn't thought. It's a phrase, pre-packaged and emotionless, like a voicemail left by the culture. You begin to detect it, the copy-paste cadence of a society that no longer thinks, but repeats. And you want to believe they're just distracted, that it's a phase, that with enough space, silence, or eye contact, something deeper will emerge. But often, it doesn't. What looks like distraction is actually the default setting. What looks like busyness is actually emptiness on a schedule. What you thought was temporary begins to feel permanent. It's here the concept of organic portals stops being a theory and begins to feel like a diagnosis. You're no longer hunting for evidence. The evidence is in everything. In the looping arguments, in the artificial politeness, in the eerie resistance to presence. You offer depth, and they slide away. You offer silence, and they fill it with noise. You offer truth, and it ricochets off the shell. But perhaps the most disturbing pattern, the one that makes your stomach turn, is the way the world seems designed to protect them. Not from harm, from awakening. Systems, rituals, even language itself seems structured to support surface-level existence. Education teaches compliance. Media rewards outrage. Relationships are built around entertainment, not understanding. Even so-called spiritual spaces often drown in cliché, in content, in the performance of truth with none of its consequence. You begin to realize something brutal and unspoken. Maybe the world doesn't want everyone to wake up. Maybe the system requires the unconscious. Maybe the code needs enough portals to maintain structure, just like a video game needs background characters to keep the illusion alive. If everyone woke up, the simulation might collapse. And if that's true, it changes everything. Because now, your path isn't just about seeing the difference. It's about living differently without becoming hostile, without becoming bitter, without becoming one of them in a different costume. An awake person repeating their own script of cynicism and superiority. You realize the danger is not just being surrounded by the unaware. The danger is becoming emotionally entangled with them, expecting reciprocity where there is only programming, offering your essence where there is no receiver. You begin to feel your energy leak, not because you gave too much, but because you gave in vain, and slowly, painfully, you learn the discipline of sacred distance. You still offer kindness, but no longer for recognition. You still speak truth, but only where there is space for it to land. You withdraw, not in judgment, but in protection, because you know what you carry now, and you know how rare it is. This is the loneliness of lucidity, the ache of knowing, the burden of clarity in a world that runs on noise. But you also begin to sense something else, something stronger than the ache, a current, a signal, a quiet vibration underneath the simulation, calling you toward others like you. Rare, scattered, maybe silent, but real. And the moment you find just one, everything changes. You don't need many, just one. One person who looks at you, not through you. one who pauses before they speak, not because they're searching for the right words, but because they actually care what truth sounds like. One whose presence doesn't demand performance, whose silence isn't empty, but full of listening, of sensing, of that rarest of things in modern life, awareness. It's easy to underestimate how starved you've become for this kind of connection. Not the kind that scrolls, that texts, that posts, that nods and laughs at all the right times, but the kind that feels, the kind that vibrates, the kind that can sit with you in a room and say absolutely nothing and still tell you everything. And when you finally find it, when someone's gaze doesn't bounce off your being, but actually lands, you remember what being human is supposed to feel like, because that's the thing about living surrounded by simulations. You forget what authenticity feels like, what spontaneity looks like, what non-scripted human contact actually does to the nervous system. And when you find it again, raw, unfiltered, unmanufactured, it's not just comforting, it's healing. It repairs something you didn't even know was broken. These people, the real ones, don't need to impress you. They don't list credentials or brag about awareness or try to sell you a narrative of how conscious they are. They don't need to. You feel it in their presence. There's depth behind the eyes, not always polished, not always eloquent, but undeniably there. And when they speak, even if it's clumsy or quiet or strange, it doesn't echo. It lands. And this is how you begin to distinguish signal from noise, not through logic alone, but through resonance. You begin to trust your nervous system again. You feel when someone is home, and you feel when they're just a facade, a loop running on flesh. You stop trying to explain it. You stop trying to convince yourself otherwise. You just know. But here's the paradox. The more deeply you awaken, the less you need others to confirm your path. And yet, the more sacred the real ones become, not as saviors, not as teachers, but as mirrors. Proof that you're not hallucinating, that this strange, disorienting clarity you found isn't madness, it's recognition. Because if they exist, even one of them, it means this world isn't fully asleep. It means your presence here still matters. You begin to understand something vital. Your role is not to convert the portals, or expose them, or even judge them. Your role is to stay undistorted by them, to find the others, and to build with them, quietly, steadily, outside the reach of the system. This is how real change begins. Not through noise, not through confrontation, but through signal. Authentic, aligned, incorruptible signal. Because if even a handful of people in this matrix remember who they are, if they refuse to collapse into the loop, if they choose stillness over speed, silence over script, presence over performance, then the code begins to bend. The simulation weakens, and the original light, buried for so long, begins to leak through. So you look for them, not desperately, but attentively. You move through the world like a tuning fork, vibrating silently, waiting for another note to resonate. And when it does, even once, everything you've questioned, doubted, feared, begins to make sense. You were never crazy. You were just early, and now you're not alone. Once you've seen it, really seen it, the question shifts from what is this to why is it like this? Because the patterns are too consistent, too perfectly aligned to be random. And so the suspicion creeps in, slow and chilling. This isn't accidental. This is engineered. The sleep, the mimicry, the shallowness. It's not just cultural decay. It's architecture. Everything in modern life seems designed not to develop the soul, but to distract it, to drown it. Education doesn't awaken awareness. It rewards memorization. Media doesn't inform. It fractures attention. Social media doesn't connect. It replaces depth with dopamine. Even the spiritual marketplace, so full of mantras and mindfulness and manifestations, often ends up sedating the very longing that was meant to wake you up. And the deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. This is not a glitch. This is a system, and systems have purpose. The purpose here? To keep real consciousness isolated, overwhelmed, disoriented, and eventually asleep. Because once awake, it can't be controlled. Once awake, it sees through the loops, through the illusions, through the endless performance. And that threatens everything. But how do you lull a soul back to sleep? Not by force. That's too crude. You do it through overstimulation. You feed it novelty without depth. You give it endless things to look at, but nothing real to see. You reward it for staying busy, for chasing goals, for performing productivity, all while severing it from silence, solitude, and source. And over time, the soul forgets, not because it wants to, but because it's drowning. This is the tragedy of the modern condition. People aren't evil. They're entranced. They didn't choose to become echoes. They adapted to a system that punishes awareness, that rewards automation, that slowly, methodically kills the part of you that asks why, and replaces it with the part that says whatever works. So when you start to see people repeating phrases, defending systems that harm them, attacking those who think differently, you begin to realize they're not making choices. They're executing programs. You feel it in how quickly conversation becomes confrontation, how no one listens to understand, only to defend a position they didn't even write, how people echo headlines as if they were holy scripture, while their own eyes remain dim, distant, not home. And it breaks your heart, not with arrogance, but with grief, because you see what they could be, what they were once, and what the machine, slow, patient, and precise, has sculpted them into. Smiling interfaces, performative passion, reactive outrage. But underneath it all, nothing. No core, no spark, just code. This is the moment the theory of organic portals stops being a lens and starts becoming a warning. Because the transformation isn't just happening to them, it's a threat to you. If you don't guard your inner fire, if you don't protect your stillness, your truth, your inner rebellion, you too can be devoured. Slowly, silently, efficiently. Because the system doesn't need to destroy you to win. It only needs to convince you to conform. Now that you've seen it, truly seen it, the illusion doesn't hold the same power. The loops, the mimicry, the synthetic emotion that once passed for connection, it all starts to lose shape the moment your perception sharpens. You don't need to analyze every interaction or dissect every conversation. You just feel it, the hollowness, the autopilot, the absence, and more than that, you feel yourself responding differently. You stop nodding, stop pretending, stop offering pieces of your truth to people who aren't built to hold it. And that shift, quiet and internal, is how awakening begins to take root in your reality. Not as a concept, but as a way of moving through the world. The truth is, this knowledge isn't comfortable. It doesn't make you feel enlightened or powerful. It makes you feel alone, at first, because you start noticing how rare presence is. You begin to see how much of your life was spent surrounded not by people, but by programs, by interfaces, by beautiful shells reciting borrowed scripts. And while you once felt confused or frustrated by that, now you feel something else. Grief. A gentle mourning for the world that could have been, if only more souls had chosen to wake up. But don't let that grief harden you. That's what the system wants. It wants you cold, isolated, suspicious. It wants you to become cynical, to close your heart and numb your senses, because that's how it wins. that's how it pulls even the awakened back into the program, not through fear, but through fatigue. So instead, you let the grief burn clean. You let it teach you compassion. You let it make you quieter. Yes, but not colder. Because silence, when conscious, is not withdrawal. It's clarity. It's discernment. And it's sacred. You are not here to fix the world. You are not here to expose the portals or convert the asleep. You are here to remember what it means to carry soul in a world that has forgotten what that even is. You are here to be one real point of light, unmoved by the noise, untangled from the web. And when others feel that, truly feel it, something ancient within them stirs. Not because you said the right words, not because you convinced them, but because presence is contagious in a way performance never can be. And so your role becomes simple. Walk through the illusion like a mirror. Reflect it without attachment. Move through crowds without losing your signal. Speak only when your words are clean. And never, ever forget what it cost you to wake up. Because that memory is your anchor. It's what keeps you from falling back asleep. You don't need a movement. You don't need an audience. You don't even need understanding. You just need to hold the thread, that quiet knowing inside you that says, I came here to stay awake. And when the noise gets too loud and the loops start closing in again, you return to that stillness, that place inside yourself that doesn't respond to programming, that remembers the stars, that doesn't need proof, because it is the proof. And maybe someday you'll cross paths with another, someone who looks at you, not with curiosity or admiration, but with that rare flash of mutual recognition. No performance, no explanation, just two sovereign beings passing in the stream and acknowledging silently, I see you. In that moment, you'll know the work is not in vain, because even one awakened presence changes the field. So don't waste your signal trying to shake the sleepers. Don't collapse into bitterness when the echoes ignore your depth. Don't seek validation from a world built to suppress what you carry. Instead, just walk, quietly, radiantly, unapologetically. Walk like someone who knows, because now you do.